Nolan Ashby was 41 years old, a man who had spent 8 years building something invisible, the kind of infrastructure that ran other companies' operations without anyone knowing his company's name, and who had learned to be comfortable with that obscurity because the work was real regardless of whether the room knew it. On the afternoon of his wedding at 2:47 p.m., the acquisition of Vero Systems closed, the wire transferred. The eighth binder in his office was complete. At 4 p.m., he stood at the altar. At 7:22 p.m., during the reception dinner, his wife of 3 hours turned to her family at the adjacent table and told them that she had stopped waiting for his company to become something. She said she loved him. She said he hadn't arrived yet. She said it in the specific, apologetic tone of someone explaining a limitation to people they wanted to keep. He heard every word. He was holding a champagne glass. He set it down with both hands and looked at the centerpiece and breathed. He had planned to tell her at dinner. She had something to say at dinner first. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. The server room at Vero Systems had been running at full capacity since the third year of the company, and Nolan had been the last person in the building on the nights when it mattered most. Nolan Ashby had built Vero Systems from a technical insight and a rented server rack into a data infrastructure platform that processed 340 million transactions per day for 22 enterprise clients across 4 industries. The company was 8 years old. It had never been featured in a consumer publication because consumer publications did not cover the invisible layer that made consumer applications function. Nolan had not pursued that coverage. He had pursued the contracts. He had pursued them the way he pursued everything, methodically, over a long horizon, without announcing the work before it was complete. He drove a 4-year-old sedan. He wore a plain watch that kept accurate time. He kept a deal binder for every significant transaction in the company's history, the term sheet, the diligence materials, the closing documents, organized and dated in a specific drawer in his home office. He had 7 complete binders. The 8th had been in process for 7 months. He was the kind of man who understood that value and visibility were not the same thing. He had spent 8 years proving it. He had met Camille in the 4th year of building the company, when she was a regional director at a professional services firm, and he had been introduced at an industry event by a mutual colleague. She was organized, socially fluent, and had the specific intelligence of someone who understood how to position things in a room. He had respected the precision of it. He had told himself they understood the same kinds of things about how work happened. He had been right about the intelligence. He had been wrong about what it was aimed at. By the time they got engaged, Camille had been explaining his company to her family for 2 years. In the particular way people explain things they were not sure how to defend, with qualifications. A startup still building, hasn't quite hit yet. He's working on it. She had never looked at the cap table. She had never asked to see the annual revenue summary or the contract roster or the term sheet that had arrived 7 months ago from an acquirer whose name would have told her exactly what the company was worth. She had decided what it was worth and had been explaining that assessment to her family in the specific register of someone managing expectations on behalf of someone else. He had noticed. He had not corrected it. He had kept working. He had not told her about the acquisition process because the term sheet carried a standard confidentiality clause, and because he was not certain the deal would close until it did, and because he had wanted, in whatever way was still possible, to be fully present for the wedding without the acquisition consuming everything around it. He had planned to tell her on the honeymoon. He had known for 7 months that he would tell her on the honeymoon. He had been carrying that plan carefully, the way he carried everything that required waiting for the correct moment. He did not know, on the morning of the wedding, that she was not going to wait for the correct moment. The ballroom at the Fairmont held 212 guests and had a quality of light in the early evening that Camille had described when they had toured it as the light that made everything look like the version of itself it was supposed to be. She had been right about the light. Nolan had noted this when they walked in during the site visit and had agreed that it was the right room. He was at the head table at 7:22 p.m. when he heard what she said to her family. It was not a dramatic moment. There had been no argument, no public confrontation, no scene. Her father had made a comment, a gentle one, the kind that had the quality of something said many times in private, about how Nolan's company had been a long investment of years. Her uncle had made a follow-up remark that carried the specific tone of people who had decided something about you and were being kind about it at your own wedding. And Camille, with the champagne and the evening and the years of managing her family's assessment of the man she had chosen, had said, "He's been building something for 8 years. I love him. I believe in him." Then, quieter, to the family in the way of someone explaining, "He just hasn't arrived yet. We're building our life regardless." Her mother had said something warm. Her father had nodded. Nolan was 4 feet away at the adjacent end of the head table. He heard every word. He set his champagne glass down with both hands. He set it down the way he set down every document or instrument he intended to return to, carefully, with full attention to the placement. He looked at the arrangement of flowers at the center of the table. He looked at the candles. He breathed once, slowly, through his nose. He had known since 2:47 p.m. that the deal had closed. He had received the confirmation on his phone during the cocktail hour, stepped briefly to a quiet corridor, read the message from the company's general counsel. Closing complete. Congratulations, Nolan, and had stood in that corridor for 60 seconds with the phone in his hand and the sound of the reception starting behind him. Then he had put the phone in his pocket and gone back into the room. He had been planning to tell her at dinner. He had been composing in the background of the ceremony and the photographs and the toasts, the version of the conversation he would have with her later that evening. He had been holding the information with the same care he had given everything in the 7 months of the process. She had made her assessment at 7:22. He did not correct it in the moment. He did not turn to her and say anything. He picked up his glass. He turned to the guest on his right and continued the conversation he had been in before he heard what Camille said. He filed it. He noted the time. He set it in the drawer where he kept things that required waiting for the correct moment. 3 years before that Saturday, Nolan Ashby had done something he had not described to anyone in those terms. Camille's first year as a regional director had been the year her firm went through a restructuring, a process that had produced uncertainty about her role, her compensation, and the territory she had been building for 2 years. She had handled it with the professional composure she brought to everything, but the year had been one of consistent pressure in a way that sat differently from ordinary work stress. Nolan had restructured their household during that year so that her financial contribution to it was reduced and his was increased without naming what he was doing. He had covered what needed covering and had not made it a subject. He had done it because she had needed the pressure reduced and he had been in a position to reduce it, and that had seemed, simply, like the correct thing to do. The company had been in year 5 during that period. Year 5 had been the company's best year to that point. He had not mentioned this either. There was a woman named Judith Barnes, 64, retired CFO, member of Vero's board since year 3, who had been at the wedding as a board guest, who had said to him once, in a board meeting in year 6, when the company's revenue had broken into the range that made the acquisition conversation possible, "You know what I have never once seen you do in 3 years of board meetings? You've never once described to this board what this company is worth in a way that required us to take your word for it. Every single number has a source." She had said it as an observation, not a compliment. He had taken it as the more useful thing he had noticed in the year before the wedding, that Camille had begun fielding her family's questions about his company with a particular kind of patient resignation, the quality of someone who had explained a thing many times and no longer expected the explanation to satisfy. He had heard this in the way she talked about the company at family dinners. He had filed it. He had told himself it was the natural distance between what you built and what people who were not inside the building could see. He had extended that interpretation further than the evidence held. That was what she hadn't understood until the 8th binder closed at 2:47 p.m. Judith Barnes found him in the hotel lobby at 10:17 p.m. when the reception was winding down and the last of the guests were saying their goodbyes. She had a glass of water, and she sat down in the chair beside him without ceremony, the way she had sat in boardroom chairs for 35 years, as someone who had work to do and was not going to dress the approach up. "I was sitting 3 seats from her when she said it," Judith said. "I want you to know that I heard it, and I want you to know what I was looking at when I heard it." She had been looking at Nolan's face. She had watched him hear it, process it, set the glass down, look at the flowers, and re-enter the conversation to his right. She had been watching with the specific attention of someone who understood what controlled composure cost on a day like this one. The announcement came out at 8:14, she said. I was watching Marcus at table 11 when his phone buzzed. I watched him read it. I watched him look at you. She looked at Nolan steadily. And then I watched the room understand what had happened this afternoon while the ceremony was going on. At 8:14, a financial news alert had gone to every phone in that room with a finance application. Vero Systems acquired by Meridian Capital Group in $700 million all-cash transaction. Camille's cousin Marcus, who worked in asset management, had been the first person to read it. He had looked up from the table. He had looked at Nolan at the head table. He had looked at the announcement again. The room had taken about 4 minutes to fully register what it was reading. Judith said, she found out at the table. Her father read it off Marcus's phone. She looked at Nolan. I watched her face when she understood what the number was. He had not been watching Camille's face. He had been talking to a college friend near the bar when the shift happened. He had felt the room change, the specific quality of 200 people recalibrating simultaneously, and had understood what it was. I want to show you something, Judith said. She opened the folder she had carried from the table. It was the document he had sent to the board 7 months ago. The letter outlining the acquisition process and requesting board authorization to proceed. The confidentiality clause was highlighted in yellow. The projected close date had been estimated as October of the current year. The close date had moved up by 3 weeks due to the acquirer's fiscal calendar. The close date moved up, Judith said. Nobody on the board knew it would close today specifically. I looked at my phone at 2:52 and said, congratulations to you in a text you haven't answered yet. He looked at the board letter. He had written it himself, in the specific straightforward style he used for all board communications. She built a picture of you over 8 years, Judith said, and she never once asked to look at the documents. She said it without editorializing, just the accurate record. You built something worth $750 million, and she didn't look. He sat with that for a moment. He looked at the lobby, the marble floor, the sound of the last guests moving through toward the elevators. He thought about the 8th binder in the drawer in his home office. I need to call my attorney, he said. I know, Judith said. She handed him the folder and sat with him for another few minutes without speaking, which was the thing he needed most. He didn't move fast. That was how he had always worked. The honeymoon was scheduled for 10 days. They went. He was present for it in the way he was present for everything that required his full attention, while something else was also in process, fully there, noting what was there, filing what needed to be filed. He did not perform happiness he did not have. He did not stage a confrontation he was not ready for. He was simply honest in the way of a man who understood that patience was not the same as passivity, and that the correct moment for a conversation was not the same as the moment the conversation was first available. He called his attorney from the hotel on the 3rd day, when Camille had gone to the spa and he had 2 unscheduled hours. He described the situation. He asked 3 specific questions. He thanked his attorney and went back to being present for the remaining 7 days. He had not yet, at the end of 10 days, told Camille the full sequence, the timing, the 2:47 close, the corridor at the cocktail hour, the 97 minutes between the wire and the ceremony. She knew about the deal from the reception. She knew the number. She had asked him that evening, quietly, carefully, already understanding something had shifted, how long he had known. He had told her. He had told her the truth without embellishment, the way he told every truth, in order accurately, so the record was clear. She had not said anything for a long time after that. He gave the marriage 4 months of genuine effort, not because he was uncertain about what had happened, but because he believed in accounting for all the information before a final position, and because he was not the kind of man who treated the word wife as temporary. He had meant the ceremony. He had stood at the altar with full knowledge of what he was doing and with genuine intention. That intention deserved the 4 months. He returned to work in the first week after the honeymoon. He was at his desk by 6:15 on the Monday morning, the same time he had been at his desk every Monday for 8 years. The advisory integration with Meridian was running cleanly. His inbox was large and answerable. He worked through it, the way he worked through everything, in order, completely without shortcuts. He was careful not to let what he knew become something he held over her. He did not mention the timing again after the conversation on the third evening. He did not bring it up at dinner or in the evenings or in the way of someone keeping score. He had never operated by keeping score. He operated by keeping records, which was a different discipline with a different purpose. The record was for accuracy. It was not for argument. Camille had said, in the weeks after the honeymoon, that she was sorry. She had said it more than once. He had accepted it each time. He had also been honest with her about the 4 months, about what he was trying, about what he was not certain of. He had not been unkind. He had not been absent. He had simply, by the end of 4 months, arrived at the conclusion the evidence supported, which was that the marriage was not going to become what either of them needed it to be. He had not announced this. He had called his attorney. The settlement proceedings were in a conference room on the 14th floor of a building in the financial district, and Nolan arrived 30 minutes early and read through the documents once before anyone else was present. Camille arrived with her attorney at the scheduled time. She was composed and professional, and she looked at Nolan with the specific expression of someone carrying something they had not expected to be carrying. He looked at her with the same evenness he had brought to every meeting he had ever been in. The attorneys managed the process. The documents were presented. The marital asset picture was laid out. The deal proceeds, the equity, the premarital holdings, the postmarital commingling questions. It was a complex picture, and both attorneys handled it with appropriate care. When the financial documents were complete and the attorneys had finished their initial presentations, there was a pause in the room. Not a hostile pause, just the pause of a proceeding that had arrived at its most material moment. Nolan looked at Camille. He said it quietly, the way he said everything that was simply true. "The wire cleared at 2:47, he said. "The ceremony was at 4. You made your assessment at 7:22. He paused. "Not for effect, just to be accurate. I thought the order of events should be on the record." Her attorney looked at his notes. Camille was looking at the table. Nolan gathered his folder. He stood. He buttoned his jacket. He shook his attorney's hand. He walked to the door. He stopped. He turned back once. "For what it's worth," he said, and he meant it, because he did not say things he did not mean. "I was going to tell you at dinner. I had been planning it since the term sheet." He looked at her steadily. "I wanted to be sure it was real before I said it was real." He walked out. It did not happen all at once. The settlement was completed in the 6th month. It was equitable and accurately documented, which was how Nolan had wanted it. He had not sought to take more than was his. He had not used the deal proceeds as leverage or as theater. The division was what the law required when everything was correctly disclosed, and the record was accurate. That was all he had asked his attorney to ensure. Vero Systems completed its integration with Meridian Capital Group in the following year. Nolan had stayed on in an advisory capacity for 8 months as part of the acquisition terms, then transitioned out cleanly. He had shaken hands with the Meridian CEO on his last day and had driven home and had sat in his office with the 8 complete binders on the shelf and had taken the 9th empty one from the box and set it on the desk. He had started the 9th. Judith Barnes had joined his new ventures advisory board in the 1st month. She had said when he asked her that the answer was yes before he finished the question. He had said he appreciated that. She had said she hadn't sat in 3 years of board meetings watching someone document every number to start declining now. He had 4 people on the new company's founding team. A 5th was joining in January. He answered every investor inquiry the same day and gave accurate projections and held to them. Judith sent something in the mail 15 months after the settlement, no note. A small plant in a plain pot, compact and reliable, the kind that grew without drama and held its shape through seasons. He set it on the windowsill in his home office, beside the row of completed binders and the 9th now growing in its own methodical way. He watered it on Thursdays. On a Tuesday morning in February, Nolan Ashby sat at his desk at 6:04 in the morning with the 9th binder open and a call scheduled at 7:30 with a partner group that had been tracking his new company's progress since the seed round. He had reviewed the data package the evening before. He had noted 2 things he wanted to address before the call and had written them in the margin of his copy. The city was still dark. The office was quiet. On the shelf, the 8 complete binders held the record of what had been built, the contracts, the term sheets, the closing documents, the proof. Each one had started as a blank page with a date at the top and had ended as a record that held. He looked at the 9th binder. The most recent entry was from last Tuesday. He added the morning's date. He wrote 2 notes below it, the items he had identified the night before. He looked at what he had written. It was accurate. It would hold. His phone screen lit on the desk beside him. A message from Judith. Ready for the 7:30. This one's going to move. He wrote back. It already is. He set the phone face down. He picked up his pencil. He turned back to the binder. His name was on the 9th page. It had always been on the page. In the morning and every morning after, he would build what he set up to build, correctly, with the record kept, in the correct order. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.